The room was tense. No smiles, no breakthroughs. Just a cold clinical photo op. It was the China-EU summit in 2025. It ended early. It ended awkwardly. And worst of all, it ended without answers. Because Europe didn't come for a deal. It came for a lifeline. But China? China's not handing out favors anymore. Welcome to Rise of East, where we follow the stories the West pretends not to see. From collapsing trade alliances to currency wars and crumbling industrial bases, the global balance of power is shifting. And most of the world has no idea. But if you're ready to connect the dots and see what's really happening, hit that subscribe button and rise with us. Because the next chapter of history isn't being written in Washington. It's being written in Beijing. The summit that changed nothing. Let's start with the summit. It was supposed to be a diplomatic breakthrough between China and the European Union. Instead, it was a polite disaster. The only actual agreement. A generic, vague statement about climate change. Translation: we couldn't agree on anything else. Because this summit wasn't about the climate. It was about trade. And in the world of trade, Europe is losing badly. Trapped between two giants, Europe is being crushed. On one side, China, the industrial juggernaut with bottomless manufacturing. On the other, the United States, an increasingly unreliable partner, demanding Europe buy overpriced LNG and follow its lead on sanctions. So now, Europe has no cheap energy, no competitive manufacturing base, and no leverage left. Meanwhile, Russia, the very country Europe tried to isolate, is selling record amounts of oil and gas to China, often at 20 to 30% discounts. In 2027 alone, Russia will deliver 10 billion cubic meters of gas to China via Sakhalin Island. Add that to the 40 billion cubic meters from the Power of Siberia pipeline already flowing this year, and you begin to understand why China's industrial base is thriving. They're not just buying cheap energy. They're buying strategic advantage. Energy equals power. Natural gas isn't just for heat. It's the backbone of chemical production, plastics, fertilizers, and steel. So every discounted Russian shipment gives Chinese factories a head start and lets them undercut European producers. Meanwhile, what's the EU doing? Still buying overpriced US LNG and acting like that's sustainable. This isn't just a bad strategy. It's economic suicide. And yet, during the summit, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen blamed China for imbalanced trade. Seriously? You cut off your own access to Russian energy. You accepted American LNG at triple the price. You imposed sanctions that crippled your own manufacturers. And now you're blaming China? Delusional demands. It gets worse. Von der Leyen actually asked China to pressure Russia into ending the war in Ukraine. Let's be honest, that's not going to happen. China and Russia are more aligned than ever. From oil and gas to military cooperation, Beijing and Moscow are building a parallel economic system, and Europe isn't invited. But perhaps the most laughable part of the summit? Von der Leyen said, China needs to propose solutions to fix the trade imbalance. Think about that. She wants China, the more competitive, more productive, and more profitable party, to make concessions. So Europe can feel better about losing. That's not diplomacy. That's delusion. The optics of power. And trust me, China noticed. They didn't even pretend to respect the EU delegation. No red carpet, no state banquet. They shoved the entire EU team onto a single bus. Now, compare that to how China welcomed the Saudis or Russians. Full state honors, military guards, national anthems, fireworks. With China, optics are everything. This summit sent a clear message. Europe doesn't matter anymore. A self-inflicted wound, and honestly, can you blame them? Europe did this to itself. They gutted their industrial base for ideology. Since 2022, the EU-China trade deficit has exploded. In 2022, it neared $400 billion. In the first half of 2025 alone, $170 billion and climbing. And it's not just because of energy. Trump's new global tariffs are forcing Europe to rely even more on Chinese goods, simply because they're cheaper. European factories can't survive without affordable inputs. So instead of fighting the deficit, Europe keeps importing more from China while exporting less. Dependency by design: rare earths, magnets, circuit boards, machine tools. The list goes on. Europe needs China to keep its remaining industries running, which makes reducing the trade gap nearly impossible. The only viable path forward: make peace with Russia, or at least stop pretending you don't. Need cheap energy. This isn't about liking Putin. It's about survival. Because if Europe doesn't reverse course, both America and China will hollow out what's left of its economy. Follow the money in 2024. Chinese foreign direct investment, FDI, into Europe jumped to $10 billion, up 47% from the year before. But it didn't go to Germany, France, or the UK. It went to Hungary. Why? Because Hungary is still buying Russian energy and staying neutral. So China gets low production costs and access to the European market through an EU member state. It's genius strategy. And it proves one thing: this isn't about morals. It's about margins. Meanwhile, in America, as Europe spins its wheels, America's agriculture sector is collapsing. And no, this isn't some abstract warning. It's already happening, thanks to tariffs, high interest rates, and rising input costs. U.S. farm bankruptcies have hit a 5-year high. In just the first half of 2025, 173 small farms went bankrupt, double the number from 2 years ago. Why? Because China walked away. They used to buy massive amounts of soybeans, pork, corn, and beef from the U.S., but after Trump's trade escalation, China turned to Brazil and the BRICS bloc for food security. The appetite didn't vanish. Only the supplier changed. The debt spiral. Now the U.S. government is spending over $20 billion annually just to keep American farms afloat. $10 billion in crop subsidies, $2 billion in safety net programs, $10 billion in emergency assistance. And that number is only going up. Trump has two choices: add more debt or let U.S. farms collapse. Spoiler alert, he'll pick debt. Because no president wants to see Midwest farms turn into ghost towns in an election year. Currency. War begins, but here's the irony. To fix America's collapsing exports, Trump now wants a weaker dollar. The same man who bragged about a strong currency is now asking Jerome Powell to slash interest rates by 3%. Why? Because reshoring factories doesn't work with a strong dollar. Tariffs already make goods expensive. A strong dollar makes them even worse. The new strategy? Race to the bottom. The problem with a weaker dollar, but here's the trap. Weaker dollar doesn't just make U.S. exports cheaper. It also makes imports more expensive, especially for intermediate goods. Over 51% of U.S. imports are raw materials and components: steel, chemicals, semiconductors, plastic resins, and those are already under tariffs of 30 to 50%. So if the dollar drops another 10%, production costs spike. To actually offset those costs and be competitive in exports, the dollar might need to fall another 20 to 30%. That would be financial suicide. The gold shift now. Ask yourself, what happens when the world starts dumping dollars? That's already underway. In 2024 and 2025, global central banks increased their gold reserves by 60%. Gold now makes up 25% of global reserves, up from 15% just 2 years ago. This isn't random. It's a strategic shift away from the U.S. dollar. Treasuries are being replaced by bullion. And if the dollar falls another 10%, the flight to gold will accelerate. Treasury demand will crater, U.S. debt will spiral, and interest rates? Unpredictable, unsustainable. This is not a game. Trump can't just push a button and make the dollar weaker without consequences. The global economy doesn't work that way anymore, and the world's not buying what Washington is selling. So here's the truth no one wants to admit. Europe is collapsing by choice. America is bleeding from policy wounds. And China? China is watching, waiting, strategizing. They're not rushing, because they know the West is imploding from within. But what do you think? Can Europe fix its industrial disaster before it's too late? Will Trump's currency games collapse the dollar? Or are we heading toward a global trade order that no longer needs the West at all? Let me know in the comments. Smash that like button, subscribe to Economic USA, and stay tuned. Because the silence in the East? It's not weakness, it's strategy.